Good morning. In this opening of spring term hall, let me say that I hope again that you had restorative vacations and that you're back raring to go. It's great to have everybody literally in the building and hard at work at what I know will be a great spring term. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. The Hall of Fame Yankees catcher Yogi Berra, a much beloved and amusing philosopher, was known for his cockeyed declarations. He also suggested when arriving at a restaurant with some friends, "That's why no one comes here anymore. It's too crowded." Or, "If you don't go to other people's funerals, they won't go to yours." Let's focus, however, on the first wacky observation. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Some are more familiar with Robert Frost's take on the moment of decision when equally attractive options present themselves. Today, I want to talk a bit about making choices, big ones and small ones. We do it every day, and others with more consequential positions make them on our behalf every day. When we are young, our parents are making decisions for us. What will you wear? What will you eat? When will you go to bed? With whom will you be allowed to play? What are your chores around the house? Where will you go to school? Over time, given hope for even likely maturation, children and then young adults are granted the freedom to make more choices. As I tell the parents of Sixies every year, one of the great tasks of parenting, and by extension schooling, is to provide children with the tools and the training and the formation of healthy habits that will allow them to be more independent. Of course, independence suggests both greater opportunities for freedom, but also greater accountability. And as we get older, the consequences of our actions, arrived at independently and with the permissions we have been granted by the consequential adults in our lives, the consequences end up being more dramatic, more meaningful, perhaps even greater in their scope and in the other people they will influence. You know what this feels like. You older boys every day, and certainly every weekend, have the latitude to make independent decisions. The notion of independence is fraught, however, because hardly any decision is made independently. And I will have more to say about that momentarily. What really happens to and for young adults is that you achieve autonomy. So much of what we do in our teens is the result of older people granting us permission to do so. Parents are usually persuaded to do this by some signs that you are ready for the responsibility. But sometimes you artfully leverage the fact that everyone else in your class is able to do this thing, and that you are the only one still being treated by his parents like a baby. For how many generations has that lame ploy been used, often to some success? In my own old school home, my mother suggested one time when I invoked that sure-to-be convincing ploy that "you're the only mother who makes me be home by 11, that if I wanted to live life by those rules, I could go live with the seemingly enlightened family that I had cited." Autonomy, on the other hand, is something each of us earns, builds on, and knows when we see it. It has to do with confidence in ourselves and both a yearning for independence and the self-knowledge that we are ready to proceed, guided by our own best lights, our intuitions, and our ability to make choices. Every day we are making decisions, making choices. Usually these choices are the result of problem solving, even if the only problem being solved is our need to make a decision. This very morning, I decided what tie and suit I would wear. I decided what I would have for breakfast. I decided when I would have to get up in order to arrive at school on time. I decided whether I would answer the waiting emails from overnight at home or when I got to school. And on each of us could go. I expect, though you are not choosing a jacket and tie, I fear you are not eagerly looking forward to a time in which you might have to dress that way, and that you doubtless picked out some hip hoodie with which you might have wanted to dazzle your classmates today. You might have chosen what you would eat for breakfast. Will it be the Captain Crunch, the Fruit Loops, the chocolate chip Eggo waffles, or the toasted breakfast sandwich from Cafe Fresh? You might have decided to take the offered ride from a parent, even though you sometimes take public transportation. You might have decided to get up early to get some work done because you conked out when trying to finish it at midnight the night before. On the weekend, and especially as you get older, you are undoubtedly deciding how you'll spend your time. What will your priorities be? RL boys often reflect that the time management habits formed here in school are not only necessary to survive, let alone flourish at RL, but that they serve you well in later life. Indeed, there is much to juggle, opportunities to consider, athletic and social, and priorities to make. Increasingly, and to the consternation of your parents, you will decide to spend time with your friends and not with your family. You will resist your parents' attempts to plan, and more particularly, bristle at having to attend nightly meals with your family, let alone join them at church or temple. You will be exercising your autonomy, the same you would a well-curated muscle. Where else are decisions essential? Just before we broke for spring break, the admission team, including virtually every teacher in the school, made decisions about whom to invite to join the school family. These decisions are not easy. Thankfully, lots of boys and their parents appreciate the merits of an RL education and compete for spots in their respective classes. We have the tough job of ensuring that boys we accept will thrive here and that they will bring distinctiveness to the mix. Interesting family backgrounds, special talents in athletics or the arts, stellar citizenship. And seniors are feeling what that judgment is like on the college end. The perversity of our system is that people in college admission offices who, thanks to hideous numbers of applicants, cannot give each individual application the attention it deserves, nonetheless have to pass judgment on whether you are a worthy applicant. Sometimes, to an outsider like me, they get it right. Sometimes they get it wrong. Thankfully, boys usually have attractive options, even if their heart's desire said no. Sadly, in this process, and I fear in much of college itself, there is not much knowing and loving. There are big decisions in our lives. Sometimes the decisions we make have to do with life or death, our own or somebody else's. I have spoken before of how worried I am that you all will make the right decisions when it comes to drinking and driving, for example. I never want you to drink alcohol and get behind a wheel, nor do I want you to get into a passenger seat when the driver has had something to drink. Find another way. Find a friend who has not been drinking. Take the keys from the friend who has. Risk his thinking you a jerk. Call an Uber, or God forbid, call your parents. As a very last resort, call me. I'm serious, especially as we enter spring, when people are apt to be more out and about, and understandably people are feeling a release from being pent up during the pandemic. There will be more times when you will be tempted to do the easy thing, even if it's the wrong thing. Use your judgment. Make the right choice. There will be countless other times in your young lives when you will be confronted with a situation in which your decision will have a bearing on life and death. To be blunt, men take responsibility for making babies. Consider the results of your actions, especially in a heated moment when your judgment is clouded by alcohol or other substances. You might not be in the best position to resist the passionate urge. Think, be safe, be careful. In situations when an unwanted pregnancy occurs, a terrible decision will have to be made about the disposition of that pregnancy, life and death. An older boy many years ago came to me to confess he had gotten a girl pregnant. He said, "So she should get an abortion, right?" I suggested there were alternatives to consider. The couple's families were brought on board, all agreed that the baby could be born and put up for adoption. The baby ended up with an adoptive couple, desperate to love a child, and the natural parents went on with their lives, continuing school and marrying other people. Tough choices, but choices nonetheless, life and death. At the end of our lives, decisions are made also. Often as the children of parents, you will be involved in decisions about when natural life should end for them. Medicine is sophisticated, and medicine can prolong the death of a critically ill patient. It's likely you will preside over the deaths of your parents. In some cases, you will have to decide if there should be a cessation of extraordinary measures to keep your parent alive. Life and death, brutally hard decisions. How do we make them? The main reason I was moved to explore decision-making today is a critical anniversary that passed last summer. It was the ultimate decision concerning life and death. This was the 75th anniversary of the dropping of atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In August of 1945, President Harry Truman made the decision to drop these newly created weapons on these two cities in order to end World War II. The Germans had surrendered in June. The United States, after nearly 4 years of fighting in the European theater and in the Pacific theater, was weary of war. Nearly 300,000 Americans had already died, including 19 Roxbury Latin boys. Then Vice President Truman had succeeded President Franklin D. Roosevelt as president when FDR, newly elected to his record fourth term in office, died in April 1945. Truman, a plain-spoken Missourian, had not vied for this opportunity. Fate had placed him in the White House at a time of great international consequence. Mindful of the delicate balance among our chief allies, the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union, Truman also felt a special responsibility for the United States to settle the score with Japan, who, after all, had provoked our involvement in the war by bombing our troops in Hawaii's Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. During FDR's presidency, he had blessed the work of the Manhattan Project, a top-secret operation intended to harness nuclear energy and produce heretofore unheard-of destructive capacity. In labs all over the country, but especially in Los Alamos, New Mexico, teams of scientists were producing and refining the recipe for a bomb that could wreak unthinkable havoc. Among the critical minds working on the bomb was R.L. grad chemist and president of Harvard, James Bryant Conant. David McCullough wrote in his biography of Truman, quote, "All felt an overwhelming sense of relief that so much time and effort, that so vast an investment of money and resources had not been futile. It was not just that $2 billion had been spent, but that it was $2 billion that could have been used for the war effort in other ways. The thing worked. It could end the war. And there was the pride, too, that a task of such complexity and magnitude, so completely unprecedented, had been an American success," end quote. Truman was eager to bring the war to an end. The American people had sacrificed a great deal over the ensuing nearly 4 years and were eager to return to normalcy, families reunited, the economy operating on a peacetime footing, reassurance that foreign affairs, determined to a great extent by our might, would offer predictability and stability. Imagine then the far greater appetite for some resolution by the Brits, who had been mired in war for 7 years. Conventional intelligence suggested that there was no question that Japan would be defeated. Their military, economy, and people had been worn down by the war-making effort. Generals advised Truman that the war in the Pacific could be ended after another year of conventional warfare, and especially the invasion of Japan by troops. While the actual estimate of likely casualties has been modified subsequently, Truman was operating under the impression that should we proceed conventionally, 500,000 of our troops would likely be killed. The enormity of that possible loss moved Truman to consider an alternative. Coincidentally, he was informed that the secret research and experimentation on developing a nuclear weapon had come to fruition. Testing had confirmed the hope that this weapon could wipe out a broad territory and those who occupied it. Those who advocated for the use of the atomic bomb initially reassured that it would be aimed at military installations and soldiers, and that the collateral damage would be limited. By the time the final plan was decided, the bombing was going to aim at Hiroshima and a few days later, Nagasaki. Truman and his advisors decided that Japan and its people should be warned that such an attack was imminent, unless the emperor and the prime minister agreed to an unconditional surrender. Japan did not agree to these terms. Truman, on July 25th, wrote in his diary, quote, "This weapon is to be used against Japan between now and August 10th. I have told the Sec of War, Mr. Stimson, to use it so that military objectives and soldiers and sailors are the target, and not women and children. Even if the Japanese are savages, ruthless, merciless, and fanatic, we as the leader of the world for the common welfare cannot drop this terrible bomb on the old capital, Kyoto, or the new Tokyo, where the imperial palace had been spared thus far. The target will be a military one. It is certainly a good thing for the world that Hitler's crowd or Stalin's did not discover this atomic bomb. It seems to be the most terrible thing ever discovered, but it can be made useful," end quote. Truman had been told that there would likely be 20,000 casualties, mostly military. In fact, 20,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, but so too were more than 100,000 civilians killed in Hiroshima and more than 60,000 in Nagasaki. Horrendous injuries were sustained by hundreds of thousands of people defacing them and handicapping them for the rest of their lives. The presence of deadly gas caused unfathomable birth defects in subsequent generations. Within a week of the bombings, Japan surrendered to our commanding general in the Pacific, Douglas MacArthur, Virtually unanimously, Americans celebrated the conclusion of an awful war and did not dwell much on the terrifying new reality that had been unleashed. You can tell from the disparaging language in Truman's statement that the Japanese had been demonized in a way the Germans and Italians had not. Are there deep-seated racial biases involved in those feelings? Probably yes. Did that make it easier to justify and endure the killing of innocent people? When all was said and done, how was the decision to end the war this way made? Several military leaders were against the dropping of the bomb. Truman, however, who had popularized the now widespread boast, "The buck stops here," declared, quote, "The final decision of where and when to use the atomic bomb was up to me. Let there be no mistake about it. I regarded the bomb as a military weapon and never had any doubt that it should be used. The top military advisors to the president recommended its use, and when I talked to Churchill, he unhesitatingly told me that he favored the use of the atomic bomb if it might aid to end the war," end quote. Since the atomic bomb was dropped in 1945, another bomb has not been dropped. The nuclear arms race, however, has defined our foreign affairs ever since. First, the Soviet Union would get the bomb. That created an ongoing bilateral standoff. Perhaps no war has occurred between the two superpowers because there was certainty that the initiation of an atomic attack would result in retaliation that together would destroy the world. Over the years, other countries have gotten the bomb, and while it requires continual vigilance about controlling the impulses of potentially rogue countries, there has been effective mutual deterrence. If Truman had not directed the bomb to be used, the Soviets soon after would have, nonetheless weaponized their own bomb, and the arms race would be joined. In my presentation today about decision-making, making choices, there could be no greater decision than the one Truman made. It affected millions of people, and it decided who would live and who would die. As with even the simplest decisions we make each day, certain elements led to consequential outcomes. How do we decide? How do we amass the facts? With whom do we consult? Whom will my decision affect? Is the outcome simply expedient, or is there a more significant ethical consideration? What is my North Star? What's in my best interest? What's in the best interest of the group, the country, the global family? I hope you will consider the ramification of this world-altering event. In your discussions tomorrow, talk about whether we should have dropped the bomb if you had been in Truman's size 7 lace-ups. Tomorrow you will be charged with a different decision-making task, and all that we have said today will inform those discussions. Thank you.